Wants to develop her creative skills as an artist, so she's selling her home in East Cumbria in an attempt to escape the attention that's followed her for 25 years. Mr. Whittaker has been along to meet her.
Nothing's gonna change my world. Nothing's gonna change my world.
Everything's changed in Cynthia Lennon's world over 25 years. She was swept up alongside John Lennon and the Beatles into a mystery tour that wasn't all magical. Total public exposure, from which she didn't escape even after her divorce and the death of Lennon. Now, a generation later, at last, she's about to do her own thing, as they used to say in the 60s. She's sold up, even though she still doesn't know exactly where she's going yet. It could be the States or somewhere in Britain. That's part of the excitement and the fought-for freedom.
Life has been pretty hectic for me. Now I feel, after 4 years of very hard slog and pressurised living from many areas, I feel it's time just to move on and have a bit of a break, recharge the batteries and dedicate myself more to me, I think.
Cynthia and John Lennon met at Liverpool Art College. She became pregnant, and while her creativity was suspended, John's was let loose on the world. His genius was all-consuming on music and remained a major influence on Cynthia even after he was gunned down in December 1980.
I think from the moment I met John, with his personality and his charisma, and what happened, what followed the Beatle situation, and what has followed since. I mean, it hasn't ended. So I suppose I'm a little bit like, or I have felt a little bit like Piggy in the Middle.
After John's talent was snuffed out, another Lennon emerged into the international headlines, and it was Cynthia who guided Julian through the emotional traumas following his father's death and the familiar hassles of coping with fame. But now he's happily adjusted and in Switzerland writing music. That release has brought a surge of art from Cynthia. She's designing for textiles and paper product makers, and now talking about featuring her delightful cat illustrations in a future children's book. She wants to get back, too, to some real painting. It's almost a complete circle, back to the student days before events got in the way. A circle which will be fully turned at the end of this month, when she leaves her Cumbrian home and radiantly slips out of the spotlight.
I just feel there's a lot more freedom, and, you know, there's a lot of time and space now ahead as far as I can see.
For Cynthia Lennon, it's hello and goodbye to those hard-forgotten days of musical revolution, peace and the power of flowers, one endless stream of monster magical mystery tours. She's about to get aboard on a new mystery journey, but this time, Cynthia Lennon will decide on the destination.
And now the weather, which comes with a view of Fletcher Moss Park.
Well, the only clue I'm going to give you is that my guest today is Cynthia Lennon, who, of course, was John Lennon's first wife.
Hello,
Cynthia, hello. Who is this Mr. Whiskey on his chest?
Well, Mr. Whiskey was bought by John from one of the apple shops for our son Julian, and it has been a very strong member of the family since. As you can see, he's been chewed and battered, and he had originally had wire glasses on, and had a similarity, a similar resemblance to John at the time. Don't know that's why he bought it. And he's been renamed Mr. Whiskey, which I don't know whether it reflects on me or anybody in the family, but he's lovely and we love him.
And you've brought in lots more of your treasures, which we'll take a look at later on.
Fine.
Now, you were very young when you and John married.
We were a young age and we weren't mature enough to appreciate, but it was a fascinating time. I wouldn't change it for anything in the world.
Now, a lot of the time in those early days, you were left at home because you had your son Julian, who you were mentioning earlier. And so, presumably, would John bring you presents back from tours, or what, that you hadn't managed to get on?
Yes, well, the first, in fact, I haven't brought them here now, but the first thing that he did do is Harrods were open for them one Christmas, and he came home with all sorts of naughty nighties and all sorts of fun fairs and God knows what. Anyway, that was the fun side of John, which I've never worn, but I've kept.
Yes.
And but this particular box was on his first Japanese tour.
Yes.
And he brought this home for me and the house.
And I know when I was looking at it earlier, you've got lots of little bits inside
yes,
it.
Yes, I'll show you. There is a photograph of my mother and I,
Yes.
who was the first time we were looking at the house in Weybridge, you know, the first signs of fame and fortune.
Oh, yes.
We were a bit bewildered. And the
Young
chauffeur
and in
was...
love. And
Absolutely. But there was a chauffeur there at the time.
Yeah.
And this apparently is a piece of the Marie Celeste anchor, which was given to be by
Oh.
Maureen Starkey. Allegedly. a
Maureen
piece, but
Starkey
who
was...
was the first wife of
Ringo.
Stark.
Right, yes.
So they
That's lovely.
they're very special little pieces and little memories.
And Geoffrey looked at the box earlier, didn't he? Did he say how old he thought it was?
Well, he said it was antique, definitely, and a very beautiful lacquer.
Yes. Now, some of the tours you did actually go on later on.
Yes.
We got some pictures here, in fact, of the American tour this was. Now, this, you would take this as you, with dark hair.
Well, yes. Well, I don't know why I did it, because I was crazy to think that I could disguise myself, because we were on a train from Washington to New York after the tour, main tour had gone on. And I put this wig on, and we were ensconced with hundreds of photographers, and I was sitting next to John and the rest of them. So I suffered this terribly hot wig, you know, trying to be sort of Greta Garbo.
Yes,
with this
that's right.
awful black wig on.
And then you also went on the tour to India. That must have been quite an experience.
Well, that was a wonderful experience. That was an escape to India, let's put it that way, not a
Yes.
tour. I
Yes.
mean, we all
Well,
went
yes.
there to sort of find ourselves and get away from the pressures of the music business.
And just one final question. Now, you obviously have a business life of your own. You're designing fabrics and so on. You've been married twice since John, and yet you still keep his name. Why is that?
Yes, I do, because in many ways, the name has used me in the past,
Yes.
in many ways, and I've had a lot of sadness through the name. I enjoyed the name. I've always been called Cynthia Lennon, but when I took it back again and I had it changed by deed poll, Julian was the first to say, "Oh, great, Mum. I mean, it's really lovely, because now it means that we're a family again. We both have the same name. We both belong together again because of all the things that have happened in between." So that, to me, sort of means everything. It doesn't really matter what's in a name anyway, as long as it makes you happy.
Cynthia, thank you very much for sharing some of your memories with us today.
You're very welcome.
Well, believe it or not, it's 25 years since the
Beirut, Belgrade, the Berlin Wall. No, just girls letting off a little hormonal steam. That's what they did when the Beatles came to town in the 60s. The Beatles were the daddy of all boy bands, and to keep the girls keen, they had to be single and available. He was Mr. Narky and Sarky. She was Miss Prim and Proper. But John Lennon and Cynthia Powell shared a secret that would have driven the Beatles fans to a frenzy.
What do you think about this rumour of George being married?
He's not married because he came in to see me and he told me. Believe me, he's not married. None of us are.
But Ringo was fibbing. Not every Beatle was a bachelor. John and fellow art student Cynthia had had a secret shotgun wedding.
But we fell very much in love with each other, and I think we had a lot in common, strangely enough. And I think the depth of our feelings were very strong, apart from the surface and the art that we had in common and music.
Love, love me do. You know I love you.
Every manager at the time thought that the pop stars should not have girlfriends. It wasn't good for the image, didn't sell records. So I stepped back into the background.
Did your wife enjoy it over there?
Yeah, she loved it. Who? Shh, don't tell him he's married. It's a secret.
Oh, I'm sorry.
John Lennon married with a baby? The big star's life was definitely kept well in the background.
He was hardly ever there. And that wasn't his fault. It was the way things were and the way things were happening. But it wasn't a proper father-son relationship. It couldn't possibly be.
Bad vibes came on a trip to Wales. As the Beatles hopped aboard a train, Cynthia was left behind on the platform.
I mean, I missed the train. That was the end of my era. And I knew that instinctively.
It wasn't spirituality that seduced John away from Cynthia. It was something much more down to earth. A Japanese pop artist, Yoko Ono.
I went on holiday at the suggestion of John to Greece, and while I was away he invited her round, and when we came back we walked into the conservatory and they were sitting there in dressing gowns. I ran upstairs in a panic, and outside my bedroom door were slippers. I knew exactly what had happened, but I was powerless. I couldn't do anything.
Those were the days, my friend. We thought they'd never end.
Now in a country cottage in Normandy, Cynthia's rediscovering the first love that never left her, art. But in the land of Renoir and Matisse, she still takes inspiration from John.
It's so peaceful, it's tranquil. I think that the attitude is very much slower. It's much less of a rat race. I think the quality of life here is very good.
Romance is back in the frame too, since Julian played Cupid by getting mum and nightclub owner Noel Charles together.
Well, my relationship with Noel is lovely. It's an age where you think that maybe it'll never happen again, you'll never fall in love again, you'll never have a companion again, and it suddenly happens. It's magical, and as long as it lasts, it'll be superb.
I feel fine.
Merseyside and the Beatles, 1962 and now. And tonight, a bunch of us Scousers look back 25 years to the time when the Fab Four made Liverpool famous all over the world. To start us off with his own personal memories of the period is Richard Stilgoe.
I used to live in Liverpool when I was just a kid, and I had a rock and roll band. I did, I really did. What's more, we played the Cavern. No, really, this is true. One glorious occasion, the Beatles played there too. I once lent George a plectrum, and I helped Paul change the fuse on the old Vox amplifier, which the Beatles used to use. When they said, do you know a drummer? I suggested Ringo Starr. And when none of them was looking, I once played John's guitar. Saturdays in Hessie's music shop, we all would choose a brand new Gibson off the wall and jam our way through blue suede shoes. Paul bought a Hofner violin bass, he found it hard to play. I said, try playing left-handed, that's how he plays today. I once lent George a plectrum, and I helped Paul change a fuse on the old Vox amplifier, which the Beatles used to use. When they asked, you know a drummer, I suggested Ringo Starr. When none of them was looking, I once played John's guitar. When Brian Epstein in his suit came in and bought us Cokes, I introduced him to them and to Scylla in the Cloaks. He asked who wants to write the songs. I answered, please, please, me. He said, that's a nice title, some other time maybe. They were hopelessly successful. They held the world in thrall. 2 popes in succession were named after John and Paul. As I lent George a plectrum, and I helped them mend their amp, so they could impress their knight. Brian Epstein pitched his camp. If I hadn't lent the plectrum, and I hadn't changed the fuse on the old Vox AC30 amp the Beatles used to use, if I'd said I thought Pete Best the best the Pool had ever seen, how very, very different the whole world would have been. You'd have never heard of Penny Lane or even Yoko Ono, Jane Asher, Linda, Pattie Boyd, all would be a no-no. And then downstairs in the cabin, in a corner of the bar, though nobody was looking, John would still be playing guitar.
In 1962, he was wearing drainpipe trousers. He's still wearing them tonight. It's Liverpool's own Mick Miller.
Thanks. This is what I looked like in the 60s. Didn't last bloody long. And the television in them days, I mean, like, I remember it all started with Skippy. Do you remember that? I think I just went through my school then. I've